A very, very special guest joins us right here on ET Now, Mr. Jayant Sinha, the Minister of State for Finance here in the Government of India. Thanks very much for being with us from all of us at ET Now. Wish you a very happy year ahead.
A happy new year to ET Now and all of your viewers also.
Thanks very much, Mr. Sinha. But let's just begin with the big retreat that has just been concluded. It was aptly called the Jayant Sangam, the top bankers there, with you, the RBI governor, the Prime Minister himself present. I want to first begin by asking you a very simple question that people in the banking space want answers to. What does the government of India under Mr. Modi and under people like you see public sector banks as? Are they commercial entities or are they vehicles of nation building?
Well, the answer, of course, is both. As the Prime Minister said in his speech to the bankers, we don't want any interference. That is, the bank should be able to do what they're supposed to be doing as commercial entities and doing it well and doing it efficiently. But not just the public sector banks, but the private sector banks obviously have a very important role to play in nation building as well. So in that sense, the leadership, the policy intervention will certainly be there as well to ensure that the banks, public and private sector, are really doing the important job of nation building. And that aspect covers both, the large scale infrastructure projects where thousands and thousands of crores of financing is required, but it also reaches down to the last person so that the old lady gets her pension, the young person gets the student loan, and so on. So, obviously the financial sector, public and private, and the NBFCs and the insurance companies, the entire ecosystem that we have has to serve the purposes of nation building as well.
It's good to interview you because you've worn many hats in the past, and of course now you wear the hat of being a policy maker. The Prime Minister very emphatically said there that there will be no interference from the Government of India as far as the running of these public sector banks is concerned. How are you going to convert this into actuality? Because at the same time, you want credit offtake. You are going to push these banks to lend more. You are going to push these banks to lend to priority sectors. How then will you balance out no interference vis-a-vis what you want banks to do?
No, I think the answer is very simple. As the Honorable Prime Minister said and the Honorable Finance Minister said as well, our goal is to be able to ensure that the public sector banks and financial institutions across the board have the autonomy to make the right commercial decisions. And when they make the right commercial decisions, market forces, the demands of consumers, the demands of businesses will be such that they will find it either attractive to provide credit or not attractive to provide credit. And of course, that will then happen naturally by itself. Our job as government is to be the facilitator. We need to put in place the appropriate regulations, the appropriate framework so that the banks and other financial institutions do what is commercially appropriate to do. Of course, with the RBI playing the role of a very prudent and thoughtful regulator, the government in its role as an owner and a shareholder of the public sector banks have obviously an important policy role to play. But ultimately, in terms of matching the needs of millions and millions of borrowers, millions and millions of depositors, and the full range of products and services, this is something that only the market economy can do well. And so what we have to do is to reduce distortions, provide the autonomy so that these decisions can be made on a commercial basis.
Sir, whenever you speak to any banker or whenever you speak to anybody who's a stakeholder in India's economy or India's banking system, they all say this sector is crying for reforms. Your government seems to be serious about this. You've started the whole process of reforms. You did this big retreat with the Prime Minister present there. The question that some of us would want to ask you is that your government, the NDA government, and it's a house view in order in more ways than one, did say that the stakeholding in public sector banks can actually go down to 33%. Your government wants to keep it only at 52%. In some sense, aren't you taking a step back? Because everybody you speak to says reforms can begin if the government stakeholding does come down substantially.
No, I think the Jayant Sangam was very, very unprecedented in the scope and the nature of the participants who were there. Obviously, we had banking executives, we had insurance company executives, we had policymakers, we had academic experts, consultants, regulators, everybody was present. And we were thinking about precisely the sets of issues that you spoke about. I think, as I said, the first and most important priority is to provide the banks the operating autonomy and the professional management and the capabilities that they need to be successful so that they can compete on a level playing field. So certainly we are going to do that, number one. Number two, what the government is determined to do as an owner.
Right.
and we are of course the custodian of, of what the people of India have given to us, which is really the ownership of these banks. As the custodian of that trust, our job as an owner and a shareholder is to ensure that these banks are obviously provided all the resources and tools and capabilities they need to compete and be successful, and therefore also to have the capital, because obviously there's going to be a capital shortage as these banks grow, to provide them the adequate capital that they can grow. But every time I look at what's in the media, Supriya, and I hear what people talk about, people talk about capital.
Right.
The reality is that the talent shortage in the public sector banks is actually far more acute than the capital shortage. So we really have to also focus on the talent shortage. We have to free the banks to be able to professionalize management, bring in people laterally, bring in high quality people, and that's how we as an owner, as a shareholder of these banks, are really enabling them to compete and to move forward efficiently.
You've given me cues for my two next questions. Number one is recapitalization and the need to do so and the rationale to do so. And then, of course, the talent deficit in India's banking space. But you haven't answered the question that I want you to answer. Will your government at any stage be open to dilute stake lower than 52%? Because that seems to be the crying need across the banking space. Why be obsessed with majority ownership? You can still control the banking space with a 33% ownership, which your government in the past has advocated.
No, it's a good question, but I think again you're putting the cart before the horse. The issue here is not what our ownership stake in the bank should be. The issue is, are the banks capable of competing effectively and taking forward the task of nation building? That's really what we need to be focused on right now. Now, whether that means that we should own 65% of the banks, 52% of the banks, or some other number, frankly is irrelevant. What is much more important is, are the banks capable of being successful, competing on a level playing field, and doing what they need to be doing, which is to be able to provide a range of products and services. So let's really focus in on that, and that's what we are focused on right now.
Right.
Actually, if you look at the numbers, the truth of the matter is that the really large infusions of capital are not required for some period of time, maybe 12, 18, 24 months from now. And in any case, I can tell you as an investor myself that at the valuations that we have right now, there is no desire for anybody to want to dilute at these valuation levels. So again, as I keep saying, we are putting the cart before the horse. The important thing we need to think about is, are these banks equipped to compete and be successful? And there, in fact, in some ways, the talent shortage is more important than the capital shortage.
Fair point.
So what we're trying to do is, we're trying to strengthen the banks. We're trying to give them the operating autonomy. We're trying to professionalize them as much as possible so that they have really good boards, really good management. We've already separated the role of the chairman from the managing director. We are really strengthening the public sector banks, and so that then they can really become effective and compete in the public sector. One final point. Everybody throws out numbers about what's required to capitalize the banks and so on. The reality is that's a moving target. It depends on a whole host of things. It depends on their own capital productivity. It depends on their price to book multiples. It depends on their credit growth. It depends on their profitability, etc., etc. So we don't know what the number should be. What we do know is, as I said earlier, we don't need to inject any capital right now. What we really need to do is to professionalize and equip these banks to be successful.
While we are talking about capitalization, I was planning to ask you this much later, but because we are talking about this, there is some view in the expert community, and a lot of economists are now voicing this concerns, that should a country like India obsess or ape the West as far as the Basel III norms themselves are concerned? Because here in the public sector banking space, government is the biggest shareholder. You've got to put in the big money, unlike in the West where private sector guys have their skin in the game. Is there some amount of thinking on those lines? Should India be aping the West, be following the Basel III norms, if at all?
In general, my own personal view is I think that the Basel III norms are prudent norms. They're wise norms. They really reflect sound thinking in terms of what's required to be able to run a financial system in a way that creates stability in the financial system. Obviously, this has been considered and thought about quite deeply at the Reserve Bank of India, which effectively is the regulator and the arbiter in these matters. And we are very happy to go along with their judgment and their views in this matter.
while we were talking about the reforms in the banking space, it's much in public realm, much debated now, the modalities of how government should own banks. And one of the things is to have a holding company structure, to eventually move to the Bank Investment Committee. Would you at this stage be willing to share some more details of what the thinking within the government is? What should the exact modality of ownership be?
Yeah, so as I said before, a number of recommendations came from the various working groups and in the presentation that the chairperson of the State Bank of India provided. Those recommendations are under consideration by the government. We are going to think about them very seriously. As I said before, really from a principles perspective and from a framework perspective, what we're really trying to accomplish is to ensure that our public sector banks are as strong and as vibrant as possible so that they can be commercially successful as well as meet the public needs that we do have. So with that framework in mind, we will consider the recommendations we've got from the working groups and try and figure out what we can implement and when we can implement it. We are considering them in a positive light, and certainly that's what the Honorable Finance Minister has said, and that is really our intent as well. But I'll say it again very clearly that we were very, very clear to the banking executives as well that as far as it comes to interference and the commercial activities of the bank, the government is not going to do that. So that's a very clear commitment that we've made, is that we are not going to interfere in the functioning of the bank, so they will have operating autonomy, number one. And number two, the other thing that we said very clearly is that we want to professionalize the banks, provide them the talent that they need to be able to compete successfully.
I want to ask you this question. Yes, you have separated chairman and managing directors. You are also open, and we're given to understand, you're also open to private talent coming into the banking space, the public sector banking space. There are two questions there. A, if you're open to that, then why not have a professional board to select these people? Why still have the Government of India or the RBI to play a role? That's question number one. And question number two is, how big an issue is compensation when you try and attract private sector talent for a public sector bank?
So I'll answer both your questions
Yes.
in turn. Your first question was really, should we consider some kind of an entity or some kind of a structure that will enable us to put good people on these boards, to select the right people to run these banks and so on. That is in fact one of the recommendations, the recommendation of a bank bureau that was made by the working groups, and certainly we are considering that. It's in the Nayak committee report as well, and we will certainly consider that. If that is the right way to move forward to professionalize the bank, certainly we will implement that as well. So that is under consideration.
So when you're saying it's under consideration, what is under consideration? That there will be a professional body that will select the heads of PSU banks?
Yes, so the specific recommendations that we got were that there should be a bank bureau. It's in the Nayak committee report.
Right.
So there should be a bank bureau that will then be a precursor to a bank investment company, right? That's in the Nayak committee report.
Yes.
And so the idea of the bank bureau would be to have a professional group of people whose job it is to appoint the managing directors and chairmen of these banks, and at the same time appoint independent directors and professional directors on the bank boards, and then to potentially provide advice and guidance to the boards and to the banks themselves. So that is the idea of a banking bureau. That would be, as I said, a precursor to the bank investment company. That's in the Nayak committee report, and that was also what was recommended by Arundhati. And we are considering that. Certainly, as I said, if there are ways in which we can move forward in that, we will certainly take that under advisement. So that was your first question.
Yes.
Now remind me again what your second.
So the second question is, let me just quote an example. Coal India wanted to get a professional private sector guy to run that company. They advertised, they went big with it.
So
not many good. Yes. So is compensation a big issue? Is that a deterrent, so to say?
No, obviously we are in a situation right now, as per the data that we've seen, that when you look at the highest levels of the public sector banks, that at that point compensation becomes a real deterrent. Now, again, as I've said before, our goal is to be able to provide operating autonomy to the banks, and we do that through the mechanism of independent, empowered professional boards. If it is then, in the best interests of the bank, as per the decision of these boards to enhance compensation to attract world-class talent, then that the board should decide. That should be the ability that should be invested in these boards to make decisions such as that.
I will ask you a question, because you mentioned banks and you mentioned reforms, and one of the things that upsets a lot of people is the rising levels of NPA. At this stage, yes, you're trying to reform the banking space. The kind of NPAs that we are seeing, the kind of restructuring that we are seeing, How much of the blame or how much of the share of the blame should the government of India shoulder at this stage? Because I'm not talking about your regime in particular, governments before you. Governments have nudged public sector banks to lend to certain sectors, loans that have gone wrong.
Yeah, well, NPA levels right now across the public sector banks are at unacceptably high levels. We know that. You know, if I remember the number right, it's about 2.7% is the net NPA number. The gross NPA number, depending on the bank, is ranging between 4 to 5%. And there's talk, you know, if you read what the analysts say, that if you look at stress assets in total, it could be anywhere between 8 to 12%. Now, these are unacceptably high numbers. And why are we in this situation? Because if we don't understand that, we obviously can't diagnose and find a way forward. Now, it's a combination of factors. Obviously, there is the whole aspect of crony capitalism that has been discussed quite a bit, where loans were given to people where they shouldn't have been given. And that's certainly something we have to consider. But I think in the last year or so, there have been a number of things that have been done, whether it is what the governor said in terms of getting promoters out, willful defaulters, debt recovery terminals, asset reconstruction companies. So there have been a lot of mechanisms that have been put in place to actually work down those kinds of behaviors and make sure that they don't happen again. So I think we've addressed that issue. Then, of course, we have to address the issue of stalled projects, which have been stalled for a variety of reasons, whether it's land acquisition, environmental clearances, or whatever. There, again, as you know, we as a government have taken it really forward. There's, I think, a whole portfolio of about 18 lakh crores worth of projects that we are monitoring on a day-to-day basis and trying to make sure that whatever the issues are or the clearances that are required, we remove those and move those forward. So that's the second set of issues. Then there's a third set of issues that are related to a variety of different economic circumstances that have changed. So for instance, you know, people went in expecting steel prices or iron ore prices to be at a certain level. Well, they've changed now.
That's right.
So it's what market economies, you know, sort of do sometimes, which is obviously the circumstances under which you decided on a project are not there any longer, and those projects have become unviable, which is genuinely kind of a bankruptcy type situation. So in those circumstances, which don't have to do with clearances or they don't have to do with, you know, loans that should not have been provided, but genuine economic circumstances that have changed, we have to really go through an appropriate liquidation process or a receivership process where we can get rid of the existing promoters and the existing equity and bring in a new set of owners and so on. That also requires further changes in our bankruptcy laws and so on, which also is a long-term thing we are working on. So we've got to work on all three dimensions to ensure that we don't repeat this problem of this massive sort of NPA situation and the debt overhang that we face right now.
When you say NPAs are at unacceptably high limits, as Minister of State for Finance in the Government of India, is it beginning to give you sleepless nights just yet, or do you think the situation can get under control?
Well, I think we all had sleepless nights before the the NDA government took over. Now that we are over, I'm sleeping very well. Now that we are in power, because what we can do and are doing is to tackle, you know, all these three factors that I spoke about. The governor and the RBI have done, you know, some very decisive things in that regard. We are really taking on these stalled projects, and as far as economic circumstances are concerned and projects that are unviable now, we are trying to find a way to be able to work those out and get, you know, distress investing working so that those projects can become viable again.
You're not a career politician, but you just tossed that hat right now. I want to move away from the banking sector reforms, but something related with banking, and your government has been rather vocal about it, which is the rate cut, the need for one to spur growth. I'll ask you, and I'll urge you to wear both your hats, the investor hat and also the hat of the Minister of State for Finance here. Do you believe the time is ripe and right for Dr. Rajan to review his stance on rates?
We are all data-driven, fact-based people, and so we look at the underlying data. The governor has access to and an understanding of the data and economic conditions, which is far superior to I certainly can do. So I will rely on his excellent judgment to make this decision.
Do you believe India is at a situation where we could look at a rate cut?
Yeah, no, I think timing in these matters is extraordinarily important. You know, my colleagues in the ministry and other colleagues in the Union Council of Ministers have said that it is a good time to cut rates, and they are seeing one side of the trade-off, which is, you know, the quicker we can get a substantial cut in rates and a turn of the interest rate cycle.
That's right, yes.
I think it's not really a question of 25 bips or 50 bips. That's really not the issue. I think the signal that everybody is waiting for is whether the cycle has turned, whether we have passed the tightening phase and now we are much more in the sort of liberalizing phase, if you will, on interest rates. that signal is a very important signal as to when it will come in terms of the interest rate cycle turning, and the markets are waiting for it. We all know that, right? So that's one side of the picture, because we know that the cycle will turn and economic conditions will improve. On the other hand, which is the longer term aspect of all of this, is that if we do it at the right time, where we really establish that we as a country, that the central bank is independent, that we really take inflation very seriously, then we will have established our long-term inflation fighting credentials, which if you look over the next 5 or 10 years of growth, could really make a big difference for us. So, you know, the short-term aspects are absolutely important, but the long-term aspects of establishing our credibility and really demonstrating that we are going to make sure that inflation, which is a pernicious, you know, and a very, very insidious problem that economies have to deal with, is fully under control. That's the trade-off we have to consider. And that's why I said timing in these matters becomes very crucial. And I will leave it to people whose judgment is far superior to mine to do that.
You being modest, and I'll let you be modest, but while on inflation, do you believe India is celebrating the fall in inflation a bit too early? A lot of the dip has happened on account of global factors, crude oil correction, which is always going to be volatile. Are we celebrating the crude comfort? Are we celebrating the dip in inflation a little too early? Because you've balanced out both views on a rate cut. I want you to first balance the inflation bit as well.
No, I think that's an excellent question. You see, when we think about inflation longer term and structurally, we want to make sure that the supply side bottlenecks, which in the first instance led to this unacceptable, sticky, entrenched inflation that we're dealing with, that the supply side bottlenecks are being dealt with appropriately. If the supply side bottlenecks are being dealt with appropriately, then inflation will not rear its ugly head again, and we'll have slayed it in a very effective way. And that really is what we want to make sure. Now, obviously, everything that we've done, and we've done really, I think, very important, very structural, very radical things as far as reforms are concerned, and the supply side bottlenecks are concerned, you know, whether it's GST, whether it's what we're doing in mining, whether it's what we're doing in banking, whether it's what we're doing in Make in India, Digital India. You look at the range of things that we're doing, I think we're really getting to the heart of the issue. And the heart of the issue in India, of course, is that we need a genuine supply side revolution.
That's right.
And once we have that supply side revolution and we make this economy truly a globally competitive, innovation driven economy, that's when we know that we can really have 7 to 8% growth, which is non-inflationary.
That's right.
Because if we don't deal with the supply side bottlenecks and the challenges that we have in infrastructure and manufacturing and so on, you know, the moment, you know, demand picks up again, we are quickly going to meet those bottlenecks that we were dealing with last time, and again inflation is going to come up. So we want to make sure we've solved it at that structural level, and that's exactly what we're working on.
That's a very valid point indeed. You can grow at 10%, but if your real rate of growth is going to be much lower. Before I move any forward on macro economy, Make in India versus Make for India, the rate cut clamor has surfaced stories about a rift between RBI and North Block. Are these exaggerated?
I think it's what you all enjoy in the media. We are all on one team. We are all on one team. We are all on one team. We are all working hard to build this great nation and to provide a much better quality of life for our people. Our first priority right now is to create jobs for our young people, and we are all working together to do that.
One view in the finance ministry, and that one we are privy to at least, seems to be that the government should be far more pragmatic with its fiscal targets. You cannot have very high, fiscal deficit targets that are too daunting at the cost of growth. You should allow yourself some fiscal slippage. Is it then a given that your government in this budget or at an opportune time will look at revisiting the fiscal deficit targets? What we have for the next fiscal 3.6% is perhaps not doable given the present economic circumstances.
Yes, so there are two very important aspects to this. One is, have we established a reputation for sound economic management? And that goes back to what I was saying about inflation and our credibility as inflation fighters. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is, have we put our house in order in terms of our fisc, right? So that's one very important aspect of it. Is a sound economic management, have we established that? And that's why it's very important to be able to lay out a fiscal consolidation roadmap, which we have, the 4.1%, the 3.6% and the 3%. That's kind of the roadmap we've laid out. But equally importantly, as we lay out this roadmap, we also have to demonstrate that the manner in which we are able to hit these numbers is a high quality way of doing it, right? So those are the things that we are working on right now, and I can assure you that as far as the target is concerned, we can absolutely achieve the target. There's no question about it. But the issue really is, what do we have to sacrifice in doing so? And we want to make sure that we do it in such a way that the quality of the fisc is excellent, and that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we don't cut too deeply, and so on. So those are the things that we're working on right now.
But going forward, would you not want a more pragmatic number to meet than have a daunting target for which you will have to cut corners, for which you will have to prune expenditure, which may actually be required to boost growth? Because as things stand today, public sector investments will have to boost growth. Private sector will perhaps just follow in. Isn't that then a given that you should allow some fiscal slippage, even if it means you have to change the act or you have to revisit targets?
No, we, of course, as I said, have to demonstrate sound economic management. So, of course, we have to do that. And as I said, the other aspect of it is the quality of the numbers themselves and what we're doing to stimulate growth. I think the happy answer to that is it's possible to do it. So let's wait and see.
You have said that the union budget will be the one that will usher in structural reforms. Will the budget be game-changing in that sense? Or will we actually see budget being a non-event and things happen outside like they have?
No, I think the way you have to think about that is that you have to look at the government as a government with a decisive mandate and a deep desire to fundamentally transform the Indian economy. The budget is just one milestone in all the different things that we're doing. We have been very active in the 6 months that we've been in power. If you look at the range of things we've done, the GST, the land ordinance, the labor reforms, the Jan Dhan Yojana, the monetary policy, the 100 smart cities, the Krishi Sinchai Yojana, I can go on and on and on. You can see already that we are transforming the Indian economy. The budget is an important milestone, but for example, the discussion we were having on banking reforms, that is being done outside of the purview of the budget. So reforms are a continuous process. The people of India have sent us here to work 24/7 on their behalf. We don't just sleep and wait for the budget to come and then work on the budget. No, we are working non-stop. I obviously work throughout the winter holidays and so on. And so you can be assured that we will be tackling all of these issues on a continuous basis.
Coming from one of the architects of the budget, that should indeed be very encouraging. Thanks very much, Mr. Sinha, for talking to us. Pleasure.
You're welcome.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/etnow.